Carlos, now, you know, both Wim and Casey have talked about, you know, the openness and the diversity of the digital space. You're coming at it from a slightly different perspective. Is the management of the security, both in terms of the ownership and personal information. Why did you choose to start this? I mean, you had a fantastic job, I'm sure, at the United Nations, great pension, probably had all that sort of stuff. But and UN people, love them though I do, are not known for stepping out of that world and going into the private sector and saying, no, we need to do something. So what was it that made you feel that that was a good step to take? And what is it you do now to develop your company?
I was a technocrat inside the UN, so I was a diplomat, but I was developing systems, and the World Wide Web was developed in Geneva, and I shared the same team developing the web 25 years ago. The web is going to be 25 years.
You must have been about 3 years old.
Yeah, no, I was 55. So actually, it was because we saw the birth of the World Wide Web that we projected what will happen 25 years after, which is now. And if you go back again to the people that designed the web, which is a hyperlinked environment, they didn't care about security, they didn't care about identification. The World Wide Web does not have an identification. And they didn't care about the connection between user and server. By the way, one question we can ask to the audience, how many of you use HTTPS before you access the internet?
How many of you know what HTTPS is?
Okay, so you see, it's
good. That's something. How many? That's awesome. How many of you use HTTPS? I do. How many of you guys do? You all do. Correct.
So the S is security, and the S encrypts your communication between you and the server. The 99% of the cyber attack today is based on password. Everybody has been hacked. Target has been hacked. Big company has been hacked. And the reason why is because passwords are totally obsolete in terms of their rights to give you to access a website or a application or a platform. So since already 14 years when I created WISeKey, and I did it actually because the Swiss government wanted to do e-voting. So the Swiss government requested me to design the e-voting platform that allows Swiss people to vote online. And we needed to invent something else than a password because it will be very easy to hack a password and then use your ID to access the government and vote with a falsified ID. So we brought the concept of digital identification. Digital identification is essential to move on the next 25 years on the internet, which are going to be transactional years. The internet is equivalent like a young kid. I mean, the internet is 25 years old, just left the university, now is going to look for a job. And before you look for a job, you're going to have to be more serious than whatever you did in the last 25 years. So the next phase of the internet is going to be transactional. Twitter, Facebook, they are becoming platforms. I mean, they started in different ways, but at the end of the day, they're going to become a platform where you're going to use your Twitter hashtag to eventually send money in the future or do transactional, maybe voting in the future. Actually, WISeKey and Facebook, we have been discussing about using Facebook for doing online voting. For that, you need a strong authentication. And a strong authentication is what it's all about. But a strong authentication is more complex than just launching a company like Twitter or Facebook in one place of the world and saying we're going to rule the world. Identity is local. Trust is local. Security is global. So you need to bring the identification to the trust environment. So an identity is something that you will have to deal with your government, because in some countries the government would like to have a say on your identity, or it's something that you're going to have to deal with a bank institution or with anybody that is issuing those identities. So building the Internet of Identities, which is what Cisco will use later to put on objects, or where Twitter will use, and actually we are doing it, to access to a Twitter account using my identity as a way to validate identity, or Facebook Connect will be reinforcement identity, will allow us to do with a transaction.
Let me ask you perhaps a rather dim question, but how do you do it? I mean, what is it you're actually doing?
It's very simple. In our case, you have an app, which is WISeID.com. You just download the app, and you put your Facebook Connect, or you can initialize the app with a Twitter account. And as soon as you start to do things inside the app, for instance, I'm going to access my bank account, there's an algorithm that detects that you are the person that you say you are, because your access was authorized by a third trusted party. And that allows that identity to become a bigger credential. And once you reach 100% level, which in Switzerland requires a validation by a physical location. So in Switzerland, you have to go to a post office or to a bank, and somebody has to check your credential, physical credential, then your digital identity is qualified. Once it's qualified, you don't have to worry anymore to bring documents with you. That identity is who you say you are in the virtual world.
Right, so there is a real-world crossover.
Yeah, so what it is actually, and I think Twitter, Facebook, and many companies, actually Google just launched a dual authentication process. They are realizing that a strong authentication is good for them. At the beginning, this goes against their business model, because their business model was let anyone, anywhere in the world, download and connect. So the connectivity and reach out was the priority. Now they're realizing that they are bringing a lot of unauthenticated people, and it's a lot of fraud into that environment. Therefore, they need to authenticate their environment, so digital identification is essential. And WISeKey is a market leader. I mean, we have no competition on that. We have VeriSign, Symantec doing something like that in the United States. But in this field, being, sorry, I have nothing to do against American, but being non-American is actually an asset for all the reasons that you know.
WISeKey help improve the security aspect of things like home automation apps, IoT. Where's Abdul Rahman, who was at the question? What do you mean by IoT? Internet of Things, sorry. How do you fit in with the security of Internet of Things?
So without, maybe mention Twitter, because I have Twitter next to me, and let's mention somebody else, let's mention Facebook. One of the things that these companies are doing, and it's normally they're doing that because their business model is based on that, is doing something you call datafication, datafy. I don't know if you understand this concept, because what is happening in the last 4 years is that suddenly people realize that creating huge amount of data, which is your behavior, has a huge commercial value. Before Twitter, we have thoughts, and those thoughts were left in the air. Nobody remembered those thoughts anymore 2 days later, or even 2 hours later. Now they are recorded.
Yeah, but is that necessarily good for you?
Exactly. So what is happening, this is creating huge data center. I mean, the largest data center in the world now is owned by Google and Microsoft. And those data centers are creating a huge amount of data, which is allowing them to do something which is coming next. This is going to start to hear that very soon, which is predictability. I can predict your behavior. If I know a lot of things about you, I mean, I'm sure your father and your mother will know exactly what you're going to do, because they know you. They have been living with you all your life, and they know your behavior. So being able to collect data is an enormous tool by companies doing social media to be able to predict your behavior. And if you're able to predict your behavior, then if you're going to dress in a certain way, or you're going to travel to certain places, or you're going to buy a certain car, these companies are able to predict that because they are data mining data. So, which is great, and I'm not against that, provided that me as a user, I am willing to do that. So I actually organized a roundtable in Davos in 2 days, with the commissioner from the European Union. We have Americans, we have Chinese, we have Russians, about this subject of how much are we willing to give our data to companies so they can predict what we're going to do. So how WISeKey solves the problem? Very simple. I don't mind to give to data what I'm going to do. I don't mind the data to know what I do, but I don't want them to know who I am. The who I am is myself. It's in life we have something we call a birth certificate. No human being is exempted to birth certificate. It's yours, and no government in the world can take away your birth certificate. WISeKey is a birth certificate. It belongs to the user, does not belong to the platform. Once I establish my ID, and I encrypt who I am, I don't mind Twitter to know what I'm doing. Because what I'm doing, it has no relation to who I am, and therefore if they can offer me a benefit to that, I am willing to sacrifice that information. What I don't want them to do is to know who I am, because if they know who I am, they will know what I do, and this is something I don't want to give to anybody.
But certain people do want to know, not only on the basis of what you do, they want to know who you are, and particularly governments.
Yeah.
So how do you, and I'm sure Twitter has come up against this, and I'm sure you will have this business of where the line is drawn between my right to protect my own information and, for whatever justification, national security being the usual one, the government's right to come after me. You stand right on that cusp. Presumably, when you have dialogue with governments, they're saying, well, you have to tell me. You WISeKey know who this person is.
And the way we solve that is in the same way, companies like SIPCA. SIPCA is a Swiss company doing all the bank currencies of the world. They do the ink and they do passwords. They produce the technology, and after the government uses it the way they need to use. Again, I provide the birth certificate, not the nationality.
Right.
So if the government letter says, by the way, I want to use your WISeKey ID, because actually we are a PKI provider and we want to use the entire national ID card. We do that for many countries. In that case, the ID of the government becomes an attribute of the birth certificate. It's not my identity, it's an attribute, it's a political attribute of who I am. If I need an ID with a bank, that becomes a financial attribute. If I need an ID with Twitter, that becomes a social media attribute. And those attributes are...
If you sold to a government, the government said everyone has to have a WISeKey, whatever.
Yeah.
Identification in the same way banknotes or passports or whatever. And they said, but we have to have the ability as the government to know who that person is at any time. You could build that functionality.
Absolutely, and those are different from the WISeKey ID. Those work on national ID projects, and there you need to establish a certification authority. Saudi Arabia has a certification authority and is already doing that. And then what we do is actually create interoperability between those IDs that have been issued in one country with IDs that have been issued in other countries.
That essentially gives the government, the ability to monitor all of its citizens' behaviours online.
No, because the IDs are keys. Actually, WISeKey is a key, World Internet Security key. So that means that you have to have a root key, master key, and a user key. And both of them is like opening a safe. Both of them, they have to open at the same time. So government will only have access to the ID they issue on national level, but government will not have the access to any other ID which are not the government IDs.
If they decide, governments, legislative bodies, they can legislate that they must have that.
No, and this is the case in China, and doing deals in China, and doing deals here in Saudi Arabia, and doing deals around the world. The national ID card is a total different thing. National ID card is basically your national ID that you are carrying in your wallet, digitalized. That's one thing. Another thing is your internet ID that I'm going to use for accessing the internet. And those things are interoperable because the algorithm allows you to have interoperability between them. But the ownership is totally segregated.
Yeah, I'm not saying now it isn't, but what I'm trying to get to is that slightly negative side, or the slightly worrying side, certainly for us, sort of free market, more liberal type of people, is that if you can build the technology to do that, you could say, well, I'm a government, I'm not letting you access the internet without having that ID.
No, it won't happen. But one of the things I really believe, and this is a fundamental belief, that the citizens belong to the government. If we don't reverse that logic, you will have a global government sitting somewhere in the world owning the IDs of the entire world. Facebook now is the largest ID owner in the world. Facebook has now more IDs than any government in the world will have. So if you don't empower governments to establish direct relations with their citizens, which is the job of the government has to know their citizens, and you like that to be done centralized somewhere in the world, that's a very dangerous model. Trust is local, security, social interactions are global. So empowering governments to use the technology will only increase the value of everything we are doing on the internet. Will not reduce it, will increase it.